taxis and buses on the Camino? Yes, they exist. But when should you be using them? That's what we're going to talk about this week, coming right up. So it's a bit of a touchy subject, taxis and buses on the Camino. Why is that? Oh, people are worried that they're going to have their fingers pointed at them because they're not true pilgrims, that they're not walking the whole distance. And I have visions of buses of pilgrims travelling down the highways with pilgrims ducked down so that people don't recognise them. There's all sorts of weird thoughts go on about using public transport during a Camino, and I just want to share sort of the reality of it, and so that you're aware of what's available and when you might want to use something like that. First of all, I never set out on a Camino ever with the intention of having to use buses, taxis, other types of transport. I really want to walk all of the way, and I have used transport, and I'll explain the circumstances, and I felt really guilty doing it. But I think it's worth talking about so that you know what's available and some of the circumstances in which it might be practical. Okay, so there's probably a few reasons why you might consider using some public transport. One would be if you're running out of time, quite simply. Let's say you have planned a block of time, you've started out in a particular city, and you're heading towards Santiago, and you just realise you're going to run out of time. You're going to be 2 days late for your flight home or whatever. You're probably going to have to jump ahead. I have done that once. I had to jump ahead by a day. I'd sort of really slowed down through injury and things like that, and I just wasn't going to make it in time. If you're going to do that, just a word of warning, you do have to realise, I'm sure you know, that in the final 100 kilometres, if you want to get your Compostela from the Pilgrims office, that certificate saying that you've walked the Camino, you cannot use public transport in that final 100 kilometres. And so you must have walked at least 100 k's into Santiago, or cycled on a bike, or ridden a horse 200 k's. So prior to that, that's fine if you need to, but not in the final 100. So that could be a reason. You're just kind of running out of time. You've kind of overestimated the distance that you were going to walk. And I haven't used a bus, but taxis are readily available. Cafes and bars and things like that can organise one for you. I know lots of people have used buses to catch up on stages and things like that. And yeah, I think if you asked in an albergue or something like that, they'd probably be able to tell you. So running out of time, and I hate to call it a legitimate reason to use public transport, but I think we all understand that it's a pilgrimage walk, and it's better if we can walk it all of the way. And you're going to feel better for yourself as well. And actually, I've got a story coming up to illustrate that. So catching up. Another reason that I have used public transport was that I did a hybrid Camino. And this was my wife Pat's very first Camino. And she didn't want to walk 800 k's. She was happy to walk, whatever it is, 114 from Sarria. And I loved that section from Sarria, but I wanted her to experience some of the earlier sections as well, so that she'd get a taste of, walking in the mountains and this kind of thing. And maybe, that would open her eyes a bit and she'd want to do a longer Camino. And that's what happened, because the one after that, she walked with me from Saint-Jean. So that was a really interesting Camino. And we went to Madrid. We got a train up to Astorga. It was really bizarre. We got a car basically to take us to Fontgirola, because I wanted her to be able to walk over the Cruz de Ferro and down to Molina Seca. So she did that. That was her first day on Camino, walking over the Cruz de Ferro and across the mountains, and that was wonderful. And then we jumped forward and we did another section up over Ocebreiro. And then finally we jumped forward to Sarria and did our Camino from Sarria. So, that was a means of having a different experience, but using public transport, so that in a limited period of time, we could sample little bits of the Camino. Would I suggest that as a really good way to do a Camino? If you've got very limited time, as in this case, and I wanted Pat to sort of see different elements of the Camino, fine. For me, I'd much rather walk, what's the term to use? A contiguous section, you know, from A to B without any breaks in it. I think that's a much nicer experience. But hey, you know, that's a way that you can do a Camino as well. And then finally, I think probably the most common reason that people find they have to resort to a bit of public transport is injury. And I've certainly had to do that a couple of times. And, you know, if a doctor kind of says to you, look, you need a day's rest and you can't afford to stop for a day, well, you know, maybe you're going to consider busing to the next village so that you can maintain your sort of program, your schedule, and have a day's rest. You know, that could be a way of doing it. And I think that's probably the reason that you find most people sort of resort to public transport. And I was just going to share a story which will make you think about it maybe before you do it. So it was on my third Camino, Pat's second, and we were going really well. We'd come out of Castro Jerez, we'd gone up over the plateau there, it was great. And it was quite a long day and it was really hot. And we were stopping at Framista that night. And I think we hadn't got as far as the canals. It was probably about 5 k's short of Framista, and actually about 10 k's short of Framista. Pat was really getting a lot of foot pain, and she has plantar fasciitis on the bottoms of her feet, and she's taking painkillers, she's got orthotics, does all of this stuff. But that day in particular, it was really agonising, and we got into a village about 5 k's before Framista, and she could barely walk. And I said, look, this is ridiculous. Why don't we get a taxi from here into Framista? You know, we're skipping 5 k's. Let's get in and see a doctor or a physio, something like that, and we'll see where we go from there. So we did that. We got into Framista. I don't think there was a doctor or physio available that I recall. We tried to find one. And anyway, she was just in so much pain, and we were wondering, what do we do the next day? And I said to Pat, look, the section from Framista into Carrion, which was where we were going to stay the next day, I think it's quite a short section, about 17, 20 k's. I said, it's really boring. It's just along beside the road. It's a gravel track next to the road with the traffic whizzing past. I said, I think you need a day's rest, but rather than us just stay here in Framista where there aren't really any medical facilities, why don't we get a taxi in the morning to go to Carrion, where we had some accommodation booked anyway. That'll give us a spare day. We can get in to see a doctor in Carrion and get you fixed up, which we did. And we saw a great physio, we went to see the doctor. It allowed her actually to have a full day's rest in Carrion at a marvellous old monastery called San Zoillo. If I remember, I'll put a link down below, but it was just what she needed, a complete day of rest. So anyway, I should put a link to the physio as well in Carrion. He was great. So anyway, we'd decided reluctantly, you know, we'll get a taxi along this short section of road and get that full day of rest. So I was sitting in the front of the taxi just to make sure that I was trying to communicate with the driver to make sure we went to the right place. And Pat was sitting in the back of the taxi. So it's a left-hand drive, of course. I've got to think what this looks like now, because we drive on the left-hand side of the road. So it was left-hand drive, so it would have been on the right-hand side of the car's on the right-hand side of the road, left-hand drive. I'm in the front seat, Pat is behind me. And on our right is the gravel track where the pilgrims are walking. You can see what's coming, I think. And for, at least 10 k's, I think, we're driving along the road and we're seeing all these pilgrims walking. And I felt guilty riding in a taxi, I have to say. But I was watching these pilgrims, and there were some that obviously had injuries, blisters, you know, limping along, literally some dragging themselves along that path. And my heart sank watching these people. And I sensed in the back of the car that Pat was getting very emotional. And anyway, we got to Carrion, and we got out of the taxi at where we were staying, and Pat just looked at me with tears in her eyes. I'm welling up remembering the story now. She said, "Don't you ever let me do that again." And I knew exactly what she meant. She'd watched all of those pilgrims who many looked to be in far worse shape than she was. And she just felt ashamed and embarrassed to have used that taxi, which is, you could say it's silly in a way, because she needed to have that day off. And it made sense to do that, and she got the medical attention and all the rest of it, but it doesn't stop how you feel about it. So I just wanted to share that with you. So, there's, and I don't want to use the term legitimate reasons, but I can't think of another word at the moment, but, if you're running short of time and things like that, and you're going to jump forward 1 or 2 days, go for it. If you're really badly injured, sometimes you might need to do it to get to a town where there's medical facilities and things like that. But I tell that story just to, I guess, warn you that you may not feel very good about it, and you're going to be conflicted about it. I always have the intention of never ever using public transport. Put it this way, I'm planning the Via de la Plata next. And I think it's on day 2, there's a 16-kilometre section of road before you get to the entranceway to the finca, where you actually go up through the park. I know that 16 kilometres walking on tarmac could end my Camino, because I've got really bad Achilles tendonitis. Do I walk it, or do I taxi it? I still struggle with that. Maybe I'll decide on the day. A lot of people jump that section by taxi because it's 16 k's on a road, but I don't want to. Who knows? We'll see. But anyway, there we go. A little story of why we've had to use public transport, why you might want to use it. Just something to think about. So thank you for watching this week. Love to get your comments down below. What are your thoughts on using public transport? Have you had to? What are the circumstances? Am I being overly sensitive about it? Or the other way, should I never even consider it? Love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Bye for now.